Welcome to your webinar, teachers. Today we are talking about engaging both leveled and decodable books in your classroom in order to strike a balance in your reading lessons. My name is Rosemary Arnott. I'm one of the digital learning managers at Modern Teaching Aids, and I spend most of my time working with our digital reading platform, Whooshka. All of the books that I showed today through demonstration are going to be from our digital platform, Whooshka. And if you'd like to have a look at it at the end of the session, I can show you how to get some free access. But let's get into it now. So I wanted to start off today just by seeing if any of you have ever been in this scenario before. So Jamie, you've read the entire page out loud with excellent fluency and near perfect accuracy. Now, can you tell me what the passage was about? Jamie stares back blankly at Miss Brown with glazed eyes. I'm sure you've all experienced this before. I know I certainly have when I was teaching in the classroom. Jamie can clearly decode very, very well, but Jamie is struggling with comprehension. I'm sure, as I said, that we've all been in this scenario before, but it's one of those moments where you go, oh, they were so close. They've got one component, but they're missing a whole other one. And then on the other end of the stick, we've got another scenario. Katie loves talking about her books and discussing complex ideas in the stories, but only if someone else reads them to her. Katie clearly understands what's going on in her stories. She clearly engages with depth as what's actually happening in her books, but it doesn't sound like Katie can actually read the words to herself. So it sounds like Katie has decent comprehension, but Katie unfortunately is struggling with her decoding. And so that whole slide, I wanted to start with that one just to sort of bring to the forefront of our minds the two things that we're actually talking about today. And I think a really important place to start is at the end. You know, when we're learning how to read, when we're teaching students how to read, what is it that we're actually going for here? And Hoover and Goff have a really nice little a little quote that I've just popped up on the screen there, which I think captures those goals pretty well. A child who can decode print but cannot comprehend is not reading. Likewise, regardless of the level of linguistic comprehension, reading cannot happen without decoding. And so I think this is summarized really nicely into two sort of components when we consider what it actually is to learn how to read, and that's decoding and comprehension. And this is summarized really nicely by the simple view of reading, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before. I'm a big fan of the way that they've put this together. And the simple view of reading sort of outlines reading like this. Reading is a combination of word recognition and language comprehension. So just like we've said, decoding and comprehension. And now when we take these two major subsets, so looking at decoding and comprehension, we can actually break them up into smaller categories as well. And you'll see here you've got your language comprehension, which is made up of a whole bunch of different components as well. And then the word recognition part as well is also broken up into different smaller facets. And Scarborough outlined this in his reading rope. So you can see we've got two different parts, essentially two different subsets of skills. We've got even two different types of colours. However, what you can see is that they do weave together in order to combine into the skill of reading. And, you know, when it's joined together like that, reading is an incredibly complex skill. There's a lot of different components involved. It's a very multifaceted skill. As you can see here, it's made up of a whole lot of different strands. And Scarborough did a really good job at sort of at depicting that, especially with this visual as well. And now what's interesting here is that when we have a look at the reading rope, it's a really great way to outline to teachers, okay, what are we actually teaching when we are teaching students to read? They've outlined this really well. We are teaching language comprehension and we are teaching word recognition. However, the next piece, of course, is the how. So we know what we need to teach them, but how are we actually doing it? And I like to say that you can break this how up into two different parts. Into the teacher knowledge. So the how is going to be influenced by what the teacher knows, the teacher experience, the teacher's view on pedagogy. But the other thing that's going to be a huge influence there is the resources that the teacher actually has available to them. And this is where we really get into the core of today's session, which is engaging two different resources within the one classroom. And of course, we're talking about level readers and decodable readers. So starting off with Decodable Readers, these are books which have been designed to help students crack the reading code. And when we say reading code, of course, we mean those shapes and those figures which are put together on a page, also known as letters, which combine together to create words. Decodable Readers, you can see here, they have a specific focus on a particular sound, and these could be a whole combination of sounds. Single letter sounds, two letters together, there's loads and loads of them. But the important thing here is to know that a decodable library follows a scope and sequence. And this is really key to make sure that the students learn all of the code. You know, it doesn't make any sense if they learn some of it and then they miss other parts of it, because otherwise they won't be able to crack the code. So decodable libraries really work through quite systematically in order to ensure that there aren't any gaps. The big thing about Decodable Readers, as you can see, I've put down the bottom here, is that it's giving students strategies to be able to crack the code themselves. If students know how to read these sounds, when they come up against a word that they do not recognize, theoretically, they should be able to work through the different sounds in the word in order to recognize the word that it actually is. And what you can see here is this is just an example of how they progress through systematically, as I said before, to make sure that there aren't any gaps. And to give you an idea of just how big a decodable library can be, if you have a look at this scope and sequence, so this is our Whooshka scope and sequence, there are over 400 decodable books in this library. And that's because obviously there are a whole lot of sounds that the students actually need to learn in order to actually master that code. Now, on the other hand, leveled books are quite different. So whilst the goal of a decodable book is to give the students the opportunity to practice their knowledge of particular letter sounds, the focus of a leveled book is that it's a meaningful text as a whole. It's comprised of natural language, and it incorporates many different components of natural language, such as high frequency words, comprehension strategies, themes, genres, vocabulary, more. You can see, for example, this is a snapshot from one of our leveled books on Whooshka, and it's got a whole bunch of different metadata there, sort of outlining those elements that I just said. And leveled books increase in difficulty as the level increases. So you can see here, this is our entire leveled library, for example. There's over 700 books in this library. And the books start off on the magenta level, and as they progress through each level, all of these different components gradually become more and more complex. So you can see, for example, here, this book is from the green level. So that's about halfway through, or a little bit earlier than halfway through. But then now what I've put up here is from a bronze level. And you can see it's already become a little bit more complex. There's more writing on the page. The vocabulary is a little bit more complicated. And as is in many areas of life, lots of different teachers have their favourite reasons to use these books, have their different strategies behind using both leveled and decodable books. But similarly, many different teachers have loads of different reasons against using both of these books. You're probably very familiar with the reading wars, you know, that sort of idea of different people agreeing with different ways of teaching reading, and there's just been so many different approaches over the last number of decades. You know, that pendulum has swung a number of different times. However, we're here not to talk about why not to use something. We're talking about how to actually use these resources that we do actually have. How can we engage both leveled readers and decodable readers in our classroom? And I think what's really interesting is if we go back to the beginning of our presentation, having a look at Scarborough's reading rope, I think it's fascinating to actually consider whether or not we can take these two goals that we're aiming for with teaching reading, language comprehension, and word recognition, and actually apply these two resources to the different parts of this. And I think it's really fascinating to consider that in actual fact, both of them lend themselves quite well to the different components. I'm sure that there are teachers out there who have sort of seen this as well. I'm, for one, I'm definitely not a fan of sort of throwing one book out in order to favour another. I think both resources are completely valid. I think they both bring different things. And that could be seen as actually a pretty brilliant thing, because when we consider the two different components involved in learning to read, perhaps having two different resources is actually quite a useful tool. So what I'd like to do now is actually talk about what this might look like in the classroom, engaging both of these resources under one roof in order to teach reading. And I've come up with 4 different ways that you might like to do this in your classroom. The thing I love about teachers in general is that you're also creative. So I have no doubt at all that most of you will sort of pick and choose bits in this that you like, pick and choose bits that you don't like. But these are just some ideas which I thought could be useful. So the first one is to start with decodables and then incorporate leveled when the students are ready. So what you can see here is in Kindy, using the decodables only as the students are just learning to crack the phonics code. And then as they get up to year 1, when they're a little bit more able to read words independently and to explore books independently, that's when you can incorporate the leveled library as well. I know definitely from the Wooshka schools that we have, a lot of schools do choose to use this approach. And then, of course, you can see up in 4, 5, and 6, when those core students, if they are at core, when they are more confident and more capable with their decoding, that standard decodable library might drop off, and they might just focus on the more deeper side of comprehension strategies that the leveled library brings. However, obviously up in those stages, in stage 2 and 3, there are still children who might need a little bit of support with their decoding as well. And so that's where you can still incorporate those decodable books if needed. So the next one that I thought about was using one for one skill and the other for another skill. So using the decodable books in order to learn how to decode and focus on that word recognition, and the level books more for the comprehension side of things. And this is where we really focus back on that rope and just really recognize those two different skills. Yes, they do wind together, of course, to help children learn how to read, but they are different components in themselves. So one of the ways that you might like to look at it is, well, if they're different components, let's use different resources. So for example, you might have one of your focuses, one of your learning intentions is particularly a decoding intention, and therefore you're going to use a decodable book. But then you might have another lesson which is focusing more on comprehension, more on a comprehension strategy. And so for that, you might use a leveled book, which is actually targeting one of those comprehension strategies. And then for anyone in the room who just really likes getting super creative, I am definitely a culprit for that. I don't think there's any reason why you can't say, all right, well, maybe we can use both for both. I think definitely it's about how you use the resources, as we've sort of said before. You know, you might have one particular resource in your classroom, for example, a pencil. That pencil can be used in a lot of different ways to teach a lot of different things. And there's no reason why these books are different. So for example, what I've said here is you might use a decodable book to focus, yes, largely on decoding, but you can still incorporate an element of comprehension into that. And what I've done here is I've sort of shown you, again, sort of using Wooshka as an example, you can incorporate an element of comprehension after that book. So for example, using the comprehension quiz, you can get the students to do a follow-up project in order to sort of ascertain whether or not they have actually understood. And what I've sort of tried to demonstrate here is that whilst the focus of that lesson might be a little bit heavier on the decoding side, there still could be elements of comprehension involved in that as well. And then similarly down the bottom, using our leveled book. So back to the slide we had before, we're still using that yellow level book. And what you can see here is it's almost the reverse. Whilst we might be focusing largely on the comprehension side of things, so we're looking at the main idea, for example, it could be that the students aren't actually ready to decode all of the words in this story. And therefore, their decoding skills might not be so worked in here because they don't actually have the skills to really read each word. And so that's why you might say, right, this lesson, whilst we can incorporate some decoding, they can identify the sounds that they see, that they know, it might be more comprehension heavy. However, there's nothing to say that whilst this is occurring on a particular level, so level 6 to 8 on yellow, what we could do is we could actually change the book. We could change the level. So now what we've done is we've taken a book which is slightly lower, and like what we said before, the complexity of the leveled books change as they go up and as they go down. So now that we've actually lowered that level, what you might find here is that the decodability of these books for the students actually increases a little bit. So going back to that idea of there being many different approaches when it comes to the how of using these resources, what I just demonstrated is suggests a much more fluid way to use the level books, rather than sort of stepping through in that structured way, starting at one level and going through each one. It could be that perhaps what works for you is picking and choosing based on what your students need in terms of what they're actually studying and what they're up to, and that links quite nicely into the next approach, number 4. And then the last one I've got here is, of course, individualizing your students' learning through differentiation. And that is, of course, using both types of books, just depending on what each student needs. You might have students in your room who need the components of a leveled book. Vice versa, you might have some who just learn really well using those decodables, and then you might have some that need both. There's no surprise here that I am absolutely on board using technology, using digital means in order to make this efficient. So what you can see here, for example, in the strategies, this is a snapshot from Wooshka, and what I'm able to do using this digital approach is just go click, 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 and literally change everyone's reading profile just by using a couple of clicks. So it just makes it really efficient, and I'm able to give each student exactly what it is that they actually need. And the last thing I'll touch on is just the importance of teacher confidence. I think there are a lot of opinions out there, and there have been a lot of opinions as to how to teach reading from teachers, but also from people who aren't teachers. And I think it's very easy for teachers to get caught up in not being sure who to listen to. You're in there every day, you're trying your best. And sometimes the last thing you need is to worry about which side should I be on, which side of the pendulum should I be on. Have confidence. I always like to say to teachers, you know your students, you know what you're doing. And remember as well that without teachers, resources are just resources. Whether it's a leveled book, whether it's a decodable book, whether it's another book, if it's just sitting on the table and there's no teacher, it doesn't really do anything. So above all, you guys are the most important part of this whole thing. So have confidence in what you're doing. But look, that is all from me. I do hope that's been useful. I always say at the end of my webinars, the best part about researching for these types of presentations is just being reminded of the absolute myriad of information there is out there from other teachers. There are so many teachers who are just really passionate about sharing their knowledge and understanding. So if you're interested, by all means, do a little bit of research. As I said, all of the books and all of the digital settings that I demonstrated today, that's all from our digital reading platform, Wooshka. If you would like to have a look at Wooshka and get some free access, by all means you can. It's a fabulous way to teach reading. We have, of course, our leveled library and our decodable library, so looking at both of the types of books that we've been looking at today. And you can absolutely get some free access just by visiting the website, which you can see up there, or by reaching out to us at that email address just there. Thanks very much for joining. Bye.